with us at the top of the hour. I'm Jamala Rogers with the Organization for Black Struggle, and we are presenting the first Rainbow Coalition in partnership with Good Docs. And one of the things that we just have to do is to lift up the genius and brilliance of Fred Hampton today. This is the anniversary of his assassination. We saw in the documentary that, that was a part of the COINTELPRO. We'll probably talk about some of that later. But, the thing that I think always amazes us even to this day is that even as a teen, a Black teen in Chicago, he understood, he had the clarity of a vision that there needed to be a Rainbow Coalition. And to me, that's just so profound, especially when I think about a 19-year-old today and what they're thinking about. So we have with us not only three of the co-founders of the first Rainbow Coalition, but we also have Ray with us, who is the filmmaker. And so he'll be able to field questions from you too. So we have a pretty robust panel here that we can have some really good discussion about. We were adamant about talking about the Rainbow Coalition even before we understood that there was a documentary out about it, because under the Trump administration, where divisions, racial, have been really just opened up really wide. I mean, a part of that was the South Carolina, event down there. But really, we see where our country is. We see where our movement is, and we just felt like, okay, we need to hit a reset button about how we're going to build a radical, anti-racist, multiracial movement here in this country. And we first have to learn lessons from the past. And so to jumpstart that conversation, and we have with us Lynn French, you saw in the video. Lynn is a former Black Panther Party member in Chicago, but she was also in Oakland. And one of the interesting things about all of the panelists is that their work within their particular organizations became the catalyst and trajectory for what they were going to be involved in. So for example, Lynn ended up going to law school, and her focus was housing and community development. So that would be no stretch of the imagination, understanding what she was doing with the Black Panther Party. We also going to have Henry Poison Gaddis with us. And Henry was also a member of the Chicago Black Panther Party. He worked directly with Bobby Lee, and eventually he went on to college to major in government and international affairs, and taking that whole international perspective with him wherever he went. We have Hy Thurman, who was one of the founding members of the Young Patriots. He was, came from Appalachia, Tennessee. He was one of the original members of the first Rainbow Coalition, and got a chance to work with all of these other brothers and sisters. We also have the filmmaker here, Mark. And so he's going to put in his 2 cents when necessary. And we will jumpstart our conversation with a couple of folks who will be asking questions. The first of them will be Janie Archie. And Janie is right here in St. Louis, she is a anti-racist lesbian who's been fighting for race, class, and gender equity, both inside and outside the LGBTQAI movement. And so we're going to open up for her question right now.
Well, I think I'm unmuted. Am I, Jamal?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first, just thank you, filmmaker. And I'm just so honored to be in people's presence that have been involved so many decades. And just the film was wonderful. I mean, I'm not a younger activist, so I am looking a little bit through the decades, but I still am trying to figure out then how can we build this kind of solidarity and intersectional kind of movement now, like a Rainbow Coalition. I mean, we've tried to do a couple in St. Louis. I was with Jamala, we tried to do some, and I guess my frustration or my question is how, especially I'm a white lesbian, is to try to get other white people invested today in this kind of solidarity and, you know, intersectional movement work, because I don't know, it just is so important. And with everything going on, I know people have a lot of just really mental health and all kinds of issues going on right now with the pandemic. But to just try to get people engaged again and to build this kind of multiracial coalition now, what would it take and what would it look like to be more intersectional and also working on the same kind of issues, obviously, that were brought up in the film?
So I'm going to throw that to any one of the panelists that wants to respond to that. And maybe that's a good one for you, Hai, in terms of looking at, you know, white folks. A lot of what was going on back in the late 60s are mirrored today. And so it's like, okay, what can we learn? What can we do differently?
Okay, well, I think we have to look at the past and what we did in the past with the Panthers and the Young Lords and other organizations, and we have to look at our commonalities and what we have in common. And we have to look at our values. Now, in a way that we organize, I'm in Alabama, which is definitely a Trump state. Huntsville, which is definitely a Trump town. But we've organized here, we started organizing a Young Patriot chapter here, but we also organized what's called the North Alabama School for Organizers. And it's about a year old and it's been very, very successful, in which we not only work with, you know, poor whites, but we work with people of all color. But one of our main goals is to try to work with poor whites and talk to them about, you know, the kinds of problems they have, and try to talk to them about racism, because we're living in an era of Trump here. And we try to, you know, talk to them and try to convince them that, you know, their problems is the same as everybody else's problems. So we try to meet them where they're at. You know, we don't try to be too judgmental, because when we get too judgmental about it, we kind of scare people away. And as Bobby Lee was saying, you have to meet people where they're at and kind of respect their values. Well, I certainly don't respect the Trump value, but that's something that we would have to work with. And you have to find out exactly where they're at and what they have in common now. Even with some of the Blacks and Hispanics, or even the Native Americans that are a part of our school, we do talk about commonalities. And we also have a class on community organizing, where we actually teach the different roles of organizers, up to 18 to 20 different roles. And we try to find out what people have in common, and if they are actually organizing in the same, you know, in the role that they should be organizing in. And a lot of people will realize that they're organizing in the wrong role, or they can organize in different roles. But we have to kind of respect people from where they're at, and we go into even into the homeless communities, into the homeless villages. We organize people there. We try to organize them into groups, you know, and some of them can even elect their own mayor and can represent themselves. And so we are always teaching anti-racism. And we work in rural areas where, you know, most of the Trump supporters come from, and some people can, you know, profess to being racist. But if you really get right down to it and start talking to them, they're only racist because of the way that they've been ignored by the system. and that, people like Trump come in and kind of offer them attention. And so that's a problem there. So we need organizers. We need people that will stand up and go into these communities and will go into rural areas, and work with people. And the other thing that we need is for them, the poor white people to tell their own story, and that, they don't need other people to tell their story. A lot's been written about them, and very little has been written by them. So I think to get there, we have to determine what our commonalities are first. What do we have in common? Like we did in Chicago with, police brutality, urban renewal, all of that. We're looking at poverty here. We're looking at systemic racism. We're looking at, religion, So we have to look at all those areas and then formulate, I think, a plan. It could even be another 10-point program, 11-point program. But I think that we have to get together with people who have the same commonalities that we have to start developing that type of that type of an organizational approach. And it's very successful here. It's working here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Our next question is going to come from Bill Fletcher. Bill Fletcher is a labor unionist, author, and a frequent writer and speaker on Rainbow Coalition and those kind of formations. So, Bill, what's your question?
Thank you, Jamala. And I want to thank the filmmakers and the panelists. I was unclear from the film. After Fred Hampton was killed, it sounded as if there was a dispersal by the organizations. Did I interpret that correctly? And were there warrants out for the arrest of other people? I mean, what precisely happened in the immediate aftermath of Fred Hampton that led to the demise of this first coalition?
So anybody that's taking Henry, you look like you moved.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, first of all, I want to pay homage to our magnetic and charismatic heroes who are martyrs in the struggle. Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, who were assassinated 51 years ago on this day, who joined our ancestors in the revolutionary happy hunting grounds. I was hoping that Lynn might answer that, because what I wanted to say is that, first of all, I had resigned from the party shortly before Fred and Mark were assassinated. But I had become somewhat disillusioned with how organizational discipline had been. Based on that, I resigned from the party. I do know that the objective of the government's counterintelligence program was focused on cutting off the head of the so-called snake in order to watch the body die. Fred Hampton was the most critical organizing and unifying force in the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and possibly, in my mind, the most dynamic force in the Black Panther Party. Once Fred was assassinated, most of the people who came into the party drifted away. And I think there's this concept within the struggle that people drift away for various reasons. As a result of Fred's assassination, many of the core leadership drifted away. I'm sure we all were suffering to a great degree of post-traumatic stress disorder, with all that was brought to bear on us by the full force of the state security apparatus. And so many of us simply sought other avenues to participate in the struggle.
Man, I'm going to ask you to jump in there, and partly also not only to answer that question, but to talk about the role of women in this whole, building of these organizations and these movements. I know a lot of times that iconic picture of all men is misleading because it acts like no women were doing anything, and a lot of us sisters cringe on that one, just like we cringe when we see the National Black Political Convention with all the brothers there, and we know who was behind the scenes because some of us doing that work. So can you talk about, the dissolution of folks in the party, which was happening, as Poison said, even before the murder of Fred Hampton, but also how did women play a role in making sure that all of those pieces were together, not just the breakfast program, which many folks thought was run by women, but it was also men were very heavily involved. But what was the role of women in
Well,
that?
let me take, these are two disparate questions. Let me deal with the first issue. I agree with a lot of what Poison said, but I can't wholly agree with him. I think that the nature of a movement that size always sees people coming and going. And when Fred was murdered in December 1969, I'm not going to lie, it scared the you-know-what out of a lot of people. That said, everybody didn't disappear. We didn't die as an organization then. The Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party functioned until 1974. Now, there was some turnover. All of the leaders did not disappear. In fact, I think most of the leaders, well, many of the leaders stuck around. I know Bob Lee had gone, and maybe a couple other people, but leaders were still around. People were still functioning. We were still building the party. And actually, we ended up with more programs. At the point that Fred was murdered, the breakfast program was our primary program. But during that period, just around when he died, we were already organizing our free clinic. And that opened in full bloom after Fred's assassination. We had other programs. For example, someone donated to us a Greyhound bus, and we superimposed a Black Panther over where the Greyhound was. And we opened a program where people from the community could go visit their relatives whom we felt were in prison as a result of an unfair legal system. That was our free busing program. We had summertime programs for youth where we served lunch. We had political education, freedom school, I guess you would call it. We had a daycare center for our own children because, as was natural with people were starting to have children, and we needed something intentional for our own children. So we started a daycare center. So it would be a mistake for one to believe that the party just disappeared in 1969. Though it is true that a lot of people were scared and left, but a lot of people stayed, and a lot of different people came. In terms of the other question of role of a woman, that's the question that I dread the most when I'm speaking, because our ideology was that women and men were equals. And so I can't say that I believe there was a role for women and a role for men. I do know that because of the media, there's an iconic picture in people's minds of a Black man with a black leather jacket and a beret and a gun, but women just as, okay, here's a good analogy. Just as we all know that Joe Biden wouldn't have won without Black women, the Black Panther Party would have folded up without, because we made the programs run. We were the one, and by the time that the party actually did start disbanding, there were more women than men. So I can't say that we had a special role that was the woman's role. We were equals. And I wish there's another comrade who one time I was speaking at Howard University with Paul Coates. I don't know if people know Paul Coates, but he was the head of the Baltimore chapter, and his son Ta-Nehisi Coates is a well-known author. Paul Coates and I were on a panel together, and somebody asked me to talk about the women's role, and he put his hand up. He said, wait a minute, let me answer this question. And he said, when we were living in Berkeley, California, I had to report to Lynn French. She disciplined me. That's my statement on the role of women in the Black Panther Party. And that's all I can really say. We didn't have just a, special role.
Okay. The last questionnaire is going to be Joe Navarro. And Joe is a poet, a culture worker, always been a resident of the Chicano Nation. Just an all-around brother with roots in the August 29th movement. So Joe, what's your question?
So first of all, I want to say it's a pleasure to meet everybody. I was, very young when a lot of this had taken place, still a teenager, but I had been familiar with a lot of the movements that have been going on in different parts of the country. Being from California, being Chicano, my very first introduction to politics in general was the struggle to free Los Siete in San Francisco, 7 Latino youths who were framed for killing a cop. And the first people who came to our aid was the Black Panther Party. They offered us Charles Gary. He took on the defense of Los Siete de la Raza. We put out a newspaper called Basta Ya, which means enough. And the Black Panther Party published our newspaper for us so that you flip it over, it said Basta Ya, and you flip it on the other side, there's the Black Panther. And so we had a lot of, a lot of commonalities and a lot of ties with the Black Panther Party, from the Bay Area in particular. And, I think a lot of organizations throughout the nation, like ourselves, the organization Los Siete, Crusade for Justice in Denver, had a lot of similar upbringing, and they shared a lot of the similar compassion and learned a lot from the Black Panther Party, especially the 10-point program. Before I go on, though, I wanted to say to Ray Santisteban, this is a really, really inspiring film for me. I thought what you did was a really wonderful job in terms of the original, the content of what was going on at that time, but making connections to how things have progressed since that time. And so I think, this whole thing was just, for me, very inspiring. But I guess that my question that I have in relation to it is that, many young people have a lot of good instincts today. They've been struggling against, national oppression, women's oppression, struggling for the rights of LGBTQ people. And they've been making a lot of those connections that were, when you were in '69, it was almost an introduction to unity, because people were involved in their own separate struggles and issues. And so I was wondering, since this is really such a positive lesson and so many things have been learned from it, what lessons do you think could be summarized for today's social movements? What lessons do you think would be beneficial to them in terms of how they're struggling for, justice, equality, and self-determination? And in that context, what does revolutionary change mean to you?
Well, I'll jump out there since nobody seems to be anxious to say anything. I don't know that I can give the definitive answer, but one of the things that we used to say is youth makes the revolution. And that was, we had a tie back then to Chairman Mao. It was from Mao's Little Red Book. But nevertheless, I look at the Black Lives Matter movement. I look at all of the movements happening now, and I think that it's the echo of what we were doing in the 60s. I think we sent out a message then. We've aged, we're graying, and young people have taken that up and not only heard our message, but are adding to it and taking it another step. And whether maybe we said off the pig, now they say defund the police. But I think we're all going after the same idea here. And I see it as a point of unity.
Anybody else want to
Yeah,
answer that?
I think that we need to also consider looking at it as globally. I mean, the United States is the most powerful empire that has existed in history. And in order to bring down this empire, we must overthrow capitalism, monopoly capitalism. We need to utilize the platforms that we have today to link up with other struggles against this empire around the world. As Che Guevara said, create one, two, many Vietnams. We need to unite with our brothers and sisters globally to challenge the US with all of its 800 military outposts, with all of its monopoly capitalism, and to continue to struggle with the world to overthrow this monster. I'd also,
Go ahead.
I'd also like to especially commend the Organization for Black Struggle for entering into its 5th decade of struggle to overthrow this monster. La lucha continúa.
Ashe, ashe. So we're going to open it up, and while people are putting their questions or comments in the chat, I'm going to move to Ray, because I think one of the things that I always think about is what makes a filmmaker choose a particular topic or issue, and what was it about this phenomenon that attracted you to doing something about it and to want to project the voices and the players that were a part of that.
Well, my kind of background has been about doing films about social movements. I had co-produced a film about Dharoua bin Wahad, who is one of the New York 21, right when I was coming out of college. And so as a follow-up to Joe's comment, what happened was every group that I had contact with, for example, starting with the Black Panthers, that's how I found out about the Young Lords, was through the Black Panthers. I'm a Chicano from LA, so I didn't know about the Young Lords. I knew about the Brown Berets and those movements. And so what I started doing, this was when I was 20 years old. This is how far back we're going. I would take road trips during summer vacation, and I went to Chicago. I met with Chacha Jimenez. This was when I first met him, about 1991. I went to the Rosebud Reservation and met people from the American Indian movement. I went to meet Corky Gonzalez from the Crusade for Justice in Denver. I met with the Brown Berets in LA. Every group that I met would talk about their alliances with other groups. And I was like, nobody knows this. How come I haven't read about this? How Corky Gonzalez used to work with AIM a lot and support AIM, even during the occupation of Wounded Knee in '73. There were all these interactions were happening. And so this is germinating in my mind. I haven't read about any of this in any books. And so finally, my progression as a filmmaker is happening. It was always in the back of my mind that there needed to be a film about this, these interactions. And then I came across the Rainbow Coalition, which was a way to tell the story, to kind of concretize this idea within a particular story. But also there's a section of the film that talks about these other alliances happening all over. I think every movement had an alliance of some sort with some other ethnic group. So we wanted to kind of honor that. But the Rainbow Coalition story was so amazing. And I think it was so, timely. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that, this film took 12 years to make. So when I started, producing the film, I would apply to places and they would say, okay, this is an interesting idea, but what does it have to do with today? Okay, this is 13 years ago because the film's already been out a year. But as time went on, they're like, oh, this is like 5 years ago, like, oh, this is a very timely film. It was the same film, but the times had changed. This is when we see the rise of the white nationalism, the the sort of mainstreaming of the hate groups. And so it's sort of this idea intersected with today. And it's interesting because when the film was finished, it was the 50th anniversary of the Rainbow Coalition. So this one idea from 50 years ago was so powerful that it still is an extremely charged idea today. And it's like the fact that it's coming out, I think it's such a great time to talk about it, because we are in the thick of it right now. The rise of these groups is here. And even Bob Lee, before he passed away, he'd say, Ray, they used to say the South will rise again. The South has risen. And he's like, it was like, these people are here now. They're back. And he basically said, we're still fighting the Civil War never ended. We're still fighting the Civil War.
A new variation of it. Aziza, you got some questions for us from participants?
We do. I just want to say thank you, Ray, and all of the participants of this film. It was such an honor to watch it. Quite insightful for me. So thank you. We do have a couple of questions that came in. One is to be alive and engaged in all this work. When it was happening, how did it feel then? And also, how does it feel now, living to see where the struggle is today?
Excellent question. Open to anybody.
Well, I'll start with the Young Patriots. The Young Patriots was a complete revelation, you know, for a group of young teenagers, you know, to realize that possibly there could be some changes made in, you know, in our community. And to see groups like, you know, the Black Panthers and the Young Lords and what they were doing in their community just really energized us. We were just a bunch of young kids, you know, mostly uneducated and certainly uneducated to politics, that began to decide to fight for our community because of the, you know, the police brutality and the urban renewal that was removing us from our homes, and which meant we'd have to go on the road again as migrants. So it was energizing to us. It was very exciting to us. And us being young kids and not having enough sense to be afraid, you know, we were feeling good about it. You know, even starting back in 1968, Peace and Freedom Party came in and said, we're running Eldridge Cleaver for president of the United States. We want some, you know, poor white person to run for vice president. And so they chose someone from our community, Peggy Terry, who was a former KKK member, you know, and so we started getting political. SDS came in, and it was just, you know, amazing how we wanted to soak up all of this, you know, knowledge and try to do something, but at the same time we were fighting, you know, you know, police brutality. We were mimicking programs by the Black Panthers, the police patrols, all that. And you know, fast forward to now, we had, of course, had no idea that we would be back here, you know, 50 years later talking about it. But we know now, those of us that are actually still alive from that era, that we could be a blueprint, you know, for poor white people, you know, because of the mandate that was given by Stokely Carmichael. Said, you know, for white people, go in their own community and organize whites and try to organize blacks. That was very important to us, so we did. And so now we have developed programs that still continue in the legacy of the Rainbow Coalition, and like the North Alabama School for Organizers, for training people to be organizers. We have programs, construction programs for the homeless. We have organizations in music and arts that we can do benefits for community organizations. We can bring musicians and artists into the fold. And so we can do a lot of different things. And when we go and talk to young people, and they're not sure of what to do, all they have to do is look back at the Rainbow Coalition. And the Rainbow Coalition was, everybody was young then, you know? And I don't think anybody is old now. I think we're just chronologically gifted. And, you know, so we're not going to call ourselves old, but, you know, we're very excited and very enthused that, and every day I get up and I'm energized. I've just written a book, plug, called Revolutionary Hillbilly. It came out this week. And that book talks about what we did in the Uptown community, along with, you know, the Rainbow Coalition. So that's where we're at. We're very excited. We're not going to, you know, we're not going to give up. We're going to keep going.
Anybody else want to talk about that? Because you
Yeah,
know,
well, like 61 years ago, my father got me involved or introduced me to the Chicago freedom movement, particularly through the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first Black organized union by Asa Philip Randolph. 4 of my uncles were Pullman porters. And by the age of 9, I was leading a march with Mr. Randolph and Roy Wilkins, who was the executive director of the NAACP at that time, and a young preacher by the name of Martin Luther King. And we marched on the Republican National Convention in Chicago in 1960. So I was actively involved with youth, but I was really an adolescent. By the time I became a teenager, I was in the youth chapter of the Illinois NAACP, and in 1968, at the state convention in East St. Louis, Illinois, I met a young man named Fred Hampton. And
that was all she wrote.
Once I heard him speak, it was all she wrote. I debated it with him before I heard him speak, but after that, it was all she wrote. He told me that he was trying to start a chapter of the Black Panther Party in Illinois. And once he was able to find an office, he would make it public. And shortly after the office opened, I was right there. And for me, it was a transition from being stewarded by my father, but as a teenager, the Black Panther Party offered me the kind of independence to be an activist. And it was a thrill. It was, you know, it was what I needed to keep me from being a gangster. And so through that, I got one of the greatest foundations of education on liberation. And today, you know, I look at things and I'm not as pleased as I want to be. You know, I look at Black Lives Matters and I say, okay, I would like to see Black Lives Matters become more subversive. I'm certain that some entity will ultimately do that to challenge this racist or capitalistic system. So as I said, you know, I'm pleased that the beat is still there. That beat that Fred Hampton talked about, that he heard when he was in prison in Menard State Penitentiary. But I would like to see young people take more of an initiative.
Good, good, good. Lynn, I'm gonna let you speak to that question because I think it's relevant for you as well. And then we'll go back to Azizi for the next round.
Me?
Yeah, so in terms of what were you feeling then as a young person involved in that movement? I mean, people talked about it was exhilarating. And also, I think for many of us who were fearless because we didn't really understand the system, we were very naive. So we were fearless. But how were you feeling then? And then looking fast forwarding, what do you see now and how are you feeling about the movement now?
Well, I was tangentially, you know, I first became aware of the movement in 1955 with Ms. Rosa Parks and all the things that were happening in Mississippi with people being murdered. You know, I later taught history of the civil rights movement at UVA, and I had a whole chapter called M is for Mississippi and Murder. So from a distance, I was witnessing that, but I was a very young person. And then in my teens, before SNCC was formalized, there was a group at Howard University. I grew up in Washington, DC. There was a group at Howard called NAG, Nonviolent Action Group. And there were demonstrations every weekend, going and demonstrating on Route 40, for example, because all the restaurants were segregated, just, you know, having sit-ins and all that. But I was so young, I didn't have the agency to just go, you know. I think that's what Poison was saying, you know, when you're young, you're seeing stuff with your parents, but you don't have that agency to step out there on your own. And I moved to Chicago in '66, and at the tail end of the Chicago Freedom Movement, which was exhilarating. But then that's when, you know, Black Power had just started with Stokely Carmichael, and there was a magazine that we used to all hunt to find called Ramparts Magazine that was like the gospel almost. And that's where I first saw Eldridge Cleaver, because he was an editor of Ramparts, where he wrote the thing, Huey Newton is the baddest, you know what, to ever set foot in United States history, you know. So we were all still looking at it from a distance. And I because of the times I was raised in, society at large didn't have great expectations for women, especially Black women. So the thought was either you were going to clean somebody's house, or if you could get a little education, you'd become a school teacher, or if you hit the lottery, you'd marry somebody who was big time, who could take care of you. And none of those, I mean, it's, you know, that wasn't appealing to me. It's like, this is who I want to be. I want to be who I am. And so to me, when the Black Panther Party opened up, it offered that avenue. We had formed one of the first Black student unions in Chicago at Roosevelt University. And we decided we were going to have just, you know, a little thing program to have invite people from a lot of public, at that time they were junior colleges across the city. We were going to invite everybody to get this dialogue going. This is like, you know, fresh after Dr. King's assassination. And we were saying, somebody said, but we need a speaker. We need a good speaker. And our classmate, Bill Hampton, said, well, I have this brother named Fred, who's part of the NAACP youth movement. He's a pretty good speaker. So we invited Fred, sight unseen, to come be our speaker. And he and Bobby Rush showed up, and they didn't even have an office yet, but that was my entree to the Panthers. And what appealed to me was another alternative to being a maid, a school teacher, or a wife, that I could develop my own interests, my own intellect, exert my own efforts for what I thought should happen to my people. And especially, you know, the first point of the 10-point program, we want freedom. We want the power to determine our own destiny. That just spoke to me. So that's how I got into it. I've probably gone on too long with that. I apologize.
So Zizi, what you got?
So,
A
you
couple
know,
more questions that came in. We had a couple more questions that came in. We were going to try to get those answered. The next one came from Mark Sherman. Had the coalition survived, what challenges would it have faced as it tried to reach its policy and program goals?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is being able to maintain organizational discipline. That's always a challenge, I think, to nascent organizations. The other thing would be sustaining itself financially. We would have had to discover other avenues of financial support. And then, of course, the ongoing repression and efforts to neutralize the Rainbow Coalition by the state security apparatus.
mhm. But also, I agree with you completely. But also, I would offer that we still exist, just in a different form. And the fact that Harold Washington was elected mayor, that whole campaign and thrust for him to be elected grew out of the Rainbow Coalition. The organizations that were the Rainbow Coalition all came together and were part of organizing for Harold Washington. You know, we were maybe no longer were the Rainbow Coalition, but what I'm saying is that the principles existed. And for many of us, when we joined the Black Panther Party, we joined as Black because we saw it as a Black nationalist organization. But through the Rainbow Coalition, we transcended the Black nationalism and became an organization that was interested in overcoming oppression and seeing the commonalities between everyone. We started a breakfast program at a time when the government didn't care or didn't recognize about children going to school hungry. Now every city in America serves free breakfast to kids in schools. We started a free health clinic when that was unheard of, and ultimately a movement of community-based clinics evolved. So it's not so much, I agree that we, you know, because of all those things about funding and repression and all that, we weren't existing as a freestanding organization. But I believe that we planted the ideas and cultivated people so that progress happened and these other things evolved. And that's why I'm just, you know, like looking to the future, I want them to, you know, take it another step, you know, and keep that evolution going, because that's how we get where we're supposed to be going. And each generation has to add to that. We gave it our shot. It's the next generation's time.
One thing I might add is the pitfalls of funding for nonprofit organizations. I think that is one thing that has really co-opted a great part of that thrust. The other thing, since Lynn mentioned it, I wanted to show this book that our audience, if they have not seen it, might read it, by Dr. Jacoby Williams, called From the Bullet to the Ballot, that really details what kind of impact the Rainbow Coalition had on Chicago politics leading up to the election of Harold Washington as mayor.
Absolutely. It's a powerful book. And one of the things I learned was how far reaching Black Panther parties were. They were all over the world. And we always thought, you know, is there Chicago or urban areas, but literally all over the world. Azizi has a couple of questions. She's going to ask both of them, and then people can choose which ones that they want to respond to.
This next one is rather long. It's from Baba Tu, with the founding member of the Organization for Black Struggle. He says, organizational discipline issues. People drifted away when democracy fades and all stakeholders are not included in making decisions. Autocracy slips back and every day people lose faith in the organization. Paternalism and male chauvinism feed the autocracy and eat away at democracy. We need to connect the lesson of this film to suffering people all over the world. Some countries that are socialist in name or really fascist. Don't we need to educate people to this reality? So hold the thought for that question. Think about that. And then the next one is Chicago's Lincoln Park and other areas, as well as Oakland, California, has seen tremendous amounts of gentrification. What actions would you suggest from lessons learned in the struggle throughout the years?
And I think that first point from Baba too, Poison has really talked about that. He talked about the discipline and what it leads to. So if somebody else wants to add into that, but you know, the gentrification piece is real and alive in 2020 as people are getting pushed to the not just to the emotional, psychological brink, but also to you know, pushed out of cities and in the urban areas that they are accustomed to. So any one of those two questions people can respond to, including you, Ray.
Yeah, just real quick is, you know, in the early stages of the film, we actually were going to try to focus on gentrification as a parallel to the urban renewal and kind of leave today with this gentrification happening. But, you know, actually we had a longer version. We weren't able to complete it, but it had a lot of that. So I really feel that that is one of the key ideas that we're wrestling with today that lingers, is this displacement of poor communities. And I'll let some of these folks talk about that. But I did want to say that we looking at this film and what was happening in Chicago, it's a central idea to what we're trying to convey, is this displacement, segregation. They're all part of the same bag, you know, trying to control people, keeping them in a certain place. And just really quickly is, you know, this film is shorthand in a sense. We wanted to touch on ideas, and we need people to take it a step further in terms of reading the book by Jacoby, reading High's book. This is the starting point. This is a way to sort of point the arrow where we should be looking, and you know, and keep talking about Fred Hampton, keep talking about the ideas of the Rainbow Coalition, because to me they're so vibrant. I mean, again, I was 21. I was when all these events were happening, I was 2 years old. But the ideas that I came across when I was 21 years old, really, I've spent probably the next 30 years of my life exploring those ideas because they were so powerful. And the history of the Rainbow Coalition has yet to be written, I believe. There is no book about it, and that's insanity. There needs to be a book about this so you can delve in more to the facts about what happened, and you know, and kind of break open this such a rich subject. Anyway, I just wanted to add that in and let one of these folks answer about the gentrification.
You've been pretty quiet up there. You want to speak to one of those issues?
Yeah, certainly. First of all, I neglected to honor my dear friend Fred Hampton and Bobby Lee, you know, and you know, I just want to just say how grateful those people were in my life, as well as, you know, Poison and Lynn, you know, in working with them. Yeah, I want to dig into the gentrification a little bit in a kind of a different way. You know, I'm working in a lot of the rural areas, and what we're seeing here is people being moved, you know, out of the cities into the country. And what's happening is there are just all kinds of housing developments going up around the country. And if I speak specifically of Huntsville, Alabama, the town has no land left, so they have to move out into the other areas. And even a cotton field where Ray and I were doing some filming just a couple of years ago has been turned into $250,000 housing. And it just keeps moving and moving and moving out into the country to where, you know, they're offering the nice prices for the land and people are selling. But I think we need to look in those areas too, because eventually there's going to be no places for the poor to go to. I know in Chicago, They're already in the surrounding older suburban areas, the older housing, and I know that they're pretty well filled up and saturated. But my one of my suggestions in gentrification is to try to get as many people, and I know we have to go somewhat to the, electoral process, to try to get more people that that we have commonalities with on these councils, in these various towns, so we can try to develop some type of a program for, for the poor. And I've even seen them take over a homeless village and start building buildings on it. And so my suggestion would just be to, I think I have to agree with Poison. I think we're going to have to become a little bit more radical than what we are in order for people to listen to us. Because if we go up with a nice attitude, the establishment is not going to listen to us. They're not going to listen to us at all. So I think sometimes it's going to take, and what we did here, as an example with, and I know it's not much of a gentrification, but we've gotten most of the Confederate statues removed, and we've gotten most of the schools named after these KKK members, named after civil rights leaders. And this hasn't been done by being nice. This has been done by demanding, and getting, I got tear gassed here in a demonstration with the NAACP because we were protesting, but we can't stop there. I guess to make a long story short here is we have to become more revolutionary than we are. And I think a lot of us have to resort back to being the revolutionaries that we were, and start putting up a fight, basically.
I think the gentrification is just a symptom of capitalism.
Yes.
And if you look at the development of this country, communities have developed in cycles. And in fact, in my opinion, our era in Black Power era was when the factories in the cities had faded out, were no longer profitable, and the people who controlled that were moving out to suburbs. It was the rise of the suburbs. And so Black people and Appalachian whites and all of us could afford to live in the city then, because the people with money were fleeing the city. And that's how we got Black elected officials and what have you. And that cycle has turned some more, and they now want to move back to the urban centers. So what's happening is that it's just a reverse of that, but it all boils down to who has the money to buy the land. You can pass whatever law you want, but unfortunately in this country, if somebody can afford to buy the property.
I got it.
Exactly.
So I think it's just a symptom of capitalism.
Yes.
Right.
And I would ask, I guess it was Baba too, to maybe, if he has the opportunity, to go back and look at the missing piece on our panel here, brother Jose Chacha Jimenez, because he actually talks about this issue in the film. And basically what the Young Lords did to counter gentrification was they went into the city office that had the responsibility for that and tore up the plans.
Yeah, we saw that. They made headlines in the paper the next day.
Right.
So we're coming to the sad ending of our discussion and this wonderful Friday evening. There's still some outstanding questions that people had and we didn't get to it. The role of COINTELPRO and police agents in your organizations, the impact of post-traumatic stress, a lot of different things that we didn't get to, but we just really want to thank you not only this has been in the chats, people thanking you for your contributions, your to the struggle, and they continued. You didn't stop, you've continued it in different ways. And so I want to thank Ray Santisteban. Say it again, Ray.
Santisteban.
I had it right the first time. Okay, so because without his vision, we wouldn't even have brought these folks together to hear the story. And glad that people are writing their own stories. So thank you for that, Hi. So thank you for the participants who came and spent this evening with us. Special thank you to Azizi Blissett, who's been our tech person. And really stay safe out there. Stay well, stay healthy. As Poison said, a luta continua, the struggle does continue. Good evening, and thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Power to the
Thank
people.
you.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
Power to the people.